Welcome everyone to Outreach's Cultural Access Forum and Exchange 2023 season and our second webinar of the season. It's really great to be with all of you. My name is Katie Sampson. I am the Director of Education at Outreach. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white disabled woman in her early 40s with blonde hair tied up in a bun and freckles and green eyes. I am seated in a power wheelchair wearing a green flower dress, and behind me is a white wall with framed pictures and plants. For those of you who are with us for the first time, Outreach is a nonprofit organization based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we create, advocate for, and expand accessible opportunities so the full spectrum of society is served. We join together in acknowledging the Lenape Nation, on whose traditional territory Outreach is settled. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land and seek to build more awareness and steward this relationship to the territory as settlers. We are also joined today with Hands Up Productions, providing ASL interpretation. Throughout the course of this webinar, you will see on the viewfinder that we have presenters that will be joining us from Tamman, and we will be viewing in gallery mode. I am really thrilled and very excited to welcome our folks and newfound partners and friends at Tamman to this webinar to talk about Take Action on Digital Accessibility. We have been asked about presentations like this for a number of years and made some really wonderful connections this past September when the United States Access Board visited Philadelphia for its first time. And we really got to understand Tamman and the work that they do in web accessibility, and are really striving to make those inroads as best they can as an organization. And I'm really thrilled to bring on our presenters. So I'm going to invite, let's see, I'm going to invite our first presenters to join us on the screen, and I will introduce you. Yeah, hi Sloan, welcome.
We're really excited to be here. Thank you so much, Katie. What Outreach does is an amazing program, amazing outreach, and the national extent that you've had since the beginning of COVID has been amazing. We're really honored to be here to help.
Thank you so much. And Mike, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Actually, Sloan, I think you're going to introduce all three of us.
Sure. So my name is Sloan Miller. I'm in charge of partnership operations at Tamman. Tamman is a accessibility and technology focused consultancy in Philadelphia. I am a 40-something-year-old white male with a rather large black beard. I am wearing a brown sweater because it's a little chilly today, but we're very excited for the spring weather to be occurring shortly. I'm going to be joined today by three members of the Tamman team. We're going to cover a number of topics. So Mike, if you would advance the slide, please, I appreciate that. So starting out will be Mike Mangos, the co-founder and solutions architect for Tamman. Mike is a thought leader in digital accessibility, and he started working on accessibility not because any client asked him to, but because he believes that access to information is a human right. After Mike, we'll be joined by Jeff Wiesner, Tamman senior product owner, who has spent 20 years working in Philadelphia art and tech community scene, including he was the co-founder of Space 1026's Artists Collective. Jeff has prioritized accessibility and inclusive design as the largest part of his career. And then we'll finally end with Marty Malloy, president of Tamman, who has 20 years of experience in leadership in education, nonprofits, and now technology. Marty really focuses on building internal organizations and systems in technology and politics and education. So we're really excited to be sharing some of our thought processes along how to take introductory action on digital accessibility. We all understand that accessibility and your journey along that pathway is variable. So we are going to be starting from the beginning, giving you some foundational information, and then taking a couple deep dives in tools and tips on whether it's websites, digital documents, PDFs, or social media, sharing some information that can help you jumpstart and take action on digital accessibility. So Mike, I'd love to invite you back up to introduce yourself and kind of cover some foundational basics of digital accessibility.
Sure. Thank you, Sloan. I appreciate it. So my name is Michael Mangos. I go by he and him as my pronouns. I am sitting in my home office today. I'm over 6 feet tall. I'm wearing a black vest, short brown hair, and I'm wearing a headset with a boom mic. I do that because I think it's easier for me to hear everybody else and for everyone else to hear me. So I think a good place to start with what is digital accessibility and what to do about it is to start with the basics about where it came from, why we're doing it. I know that with this audience, a lot of you already probably have some contact or experience with this topic. So we're not going to spend too long on the sort of the history and how we got here, but I think it is good to make sure we're all starting from the same mindset and the same understanding of terms that we're going to use during our presentation. So first of all, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or also known as the ADA, focuses on employees and the public. It is more than 32 years old this year. There's a couple things that the ADA does, and there's a couple things that it does not do. I'm going to start with what it doesn't do, and it may be counterintuitive. First, it does not define digital access or how accessible modern technologies must be. And it doesn't prescribe any consequences for not meeting this law. What it does do is require equal access to employment through accommodations. This is Title I of the ADA. And it does require equal treatment to all members of the public through accommodations, which is Title III. There's a lot more to the ADA, but these are the two that are going to affect us in digital accessibility the most. Up on screen here, there's also a picture of the first President Bush signing the ADA into law in front of, I think that's the JFK monument. So web content accessibility is defined outside of the ADA because the ADA doesn't give us prescriptions for how we should do it. There is sort of a generally recognized set of guidelines to follow. And these are international, they're not US based, and they are put together and refined every year by a governing board from the W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium, which is what that stands for. And the current guidelines that most organizations are following now are the WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. These guidelines describe how to achieve accessibility on the web. And what a lot of people don't think about is that on the web, there's more than just web pages, right? There's a lot of other types of content on the web. There's content in social media, there's content in PDFs, there's content in videos. So how to make those things accessible, or what guidelines to follow when producing that content, is also defined here in these guidelines. There's nearly 80 primary requirements. Each of those requirements are broken down into hundreds of techniques. And the typical level, there's levels to what you can use these guidelines to achieve. The typical level is AA, that most organizations and corporations are trying to achieve. Any higher than AA, which would be AAA, is really for use cases where you know your audience has specific needs and you need to comply with a certain user base to meet those guidelines. So there's a definition of digital accessibility that I really like. It's a little long. I'm going to read it aloud, but I'm also going to pause as I go through, because I think this actually hits on exactly what I think it means to make something digitally accessible and why we do it. So this is largely lifted, by the way, out of a new proposed law that's with Congress now. It has not been approved yet. Put out there by Senator Tammy Duckworth around about web accessibility and application accessibility that really helps close the gap for what the ADA does not do. But I've summarized it here or paraphrased it a bit. So the definition is it's a perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust website, application, document, or asset that enables individuals with disabilities to access the same information as, to engage in the same interactions as, to communicate and be understood as effectively as, and to enjoy the same services as are offered to other individuals with the same privacy, same independence, and same ease of use as individuals without disabilities. Disabilities also come in a spectrum of abilities, which I think is really interesting. Most people, probably if they don't interact with folks with disabilities or don't recognize that they're interacting with people with disabilities a lot, often think that disabilities are binary. You're fully sighted or fully not sighted, for instance. But very rarely are disabilities that binary. Only 20% of disabilities are outwardly apparent. Most people have more than one, if they have any. And they appear as a range, which I think is really interesting too, from permanent to temporary and situational. So permanent obviously being something like, I'm missing an arm. Temporary is, I've broken my arm. And situational is, I'm holding a baby and I can't use my arm right now. And these include both long-term and short-term disabilities. There's also, I like to think about disabilities in 5 general types. This is not a definitive list. This is just how I like to think about it, because it helps me in my process of making digitally accessible solutions. So I think about vision, hearing, or audible disabilities, speech or speaking related disabilities, cognitive or processing disabilities, and motor control disabilities, which includes like touching and moving things. Often if you're thinking about using a keyboard, a mouse, tapping a phone. On the screen here, I've got a diagram. I don't want to spend too much time describing this diagram other than to say that what we think is, a fully able action. Oftentimes, it's on a scale where you could have more or less access or ability, and sometimes the lack of ability can go in more than one direction, where you have both diminished ability all the way through to completely not able to take the action that we've created in our user experience. We have a guiding principle at Tamman, which is access to information is a human right. And we've crafted a lot of our approach and our principles and our implementations and our design reviews all around and oriented to this guiding light, or this North Star for the business. As I teach people about digital accessibility for the first time, I'm usually confronted with needing to change people's mindset about how they look at or interact with or design or use technology. So although this is not fully comprehensive, I like to start with designers particularly, or people that are creating content. I like to ask them 3 questions, right? What you're making or what you're designing, how does it look? How does it sound? And how does it feel? Some examples of how does it look is you can ask yourself, is the text size big enough for someone to read if they're low vision? Is there enough color contrast between the background of text and the text itself? Is it readable? Meaning, like, have I chosen fonts that aren't hard to make out the shapes? So that's an example of how does it look. And I think that's probably the easiest one for designers to understand if they're fully sighted and they're used to designing for how something looks. How does it sound is like a really different kind of thing, because oftentimes we're not used to thinking about the linear experience of reading a document. I'll give you an example. In here, I have 4 things in this bulleted list under how does it sound. We need to make sure that the way our document is read aloud, if you were to put all the content end to end in a line, is logical. Oftentimes, the content will be read out of order, and we don't even know it if we're sighted users or sighted designers and building content. We haven't thought about what is that linear listening experience. Also, as sighted consumers of content, many of us are used to reading something, but when we first look at a page, we'll see headings, and those headings oftentimes have larger text. They're bold, maybe they're a different color. Well, those headings are actually more useful or just as useful in a listening experience. Because with assistive technologies, people who are listening to your content get to maybe listen to all of the headings first to decide which headings are interesting to them. They also get oriented to what this content is about to be, what this content is about, and sets expectations. So you can approximate or even make a fully functionally equivalent experience by providing tagged headings, alternative text for images, and transcripts for any audio recordings or video that's part of your visual experience. And the last question there, how does it feel? There's a couple of things there too that I think a lot of designers don't think about. But if you're used to using a mouse or a trackpad, probably you are used to being able to move it with a lot of dexterity. And so you don't worry too much about button size or the order in which those buttons may appear in the code. But if you're somebody who uses an alternative input device, which could even be just a keyboard, that keyboard, you need to have the right tab order for all of the different items on the screen. So just like the listening experience, a person who is going to feel their way through this experience, not just look at it, needs to also be able to interact with that content in a logical way. And if you have content on a mobile device, having button sizes that are large enough to press, or even using certain assistive technologies that allow users to scan a page and kind of pick a target out of a moving cursor that's automatically moving through the page, these button sizes are super important. And then there's a last bullet here. This is not a comprehensive list again, but this last bullet is having skip navigation. So websites that have a lot of navigation at the top, giving some opportunity to skip over that and get right to the content. It can be a hidden feature. But for screen readers and for keyboard users, this is really important to get over something that they don't have to listen to this entire big navigation every time they go to a different page on your site. So why is all this so important, right? First of all, it's the law, and it's also the right thing to do. 71% of individuals with disabilities will abandon a website that's difficult to use. I think what's interesting about this, and it isn't really said here on screen, but that is an important point, is that 9 out of 10 users or more won't tell you why they've abandoned your experience. They'll just leave quietly. If you know that, and you know that 71% of individuals with disabilities will abandon your website if it's too hard to use, the math kind of tells the story for itself. You're not really meeting these people that have whatever assistive technology compatibility you've built into your site. You're not meeting them where they need to be met. So we didn't talk too much about accommodations. Accommodations are things that you can make for folks that are one-to-one generally. But if you have employees or partners where you're going to be making individual accommodations and digital accessibility, which is a way of making your content and your websites compatible with assistive technologies, these two things are interrelated methods that, when combined properly, can eradicate exclusion for employees, partners, and customers or clients. So we mentioned earlier that digital accessibility on the web is not just about websites. It's also about everything that might be presented on the web or even delivered electronically. So engaging a variety of people means that you generally have to expand all of your communications to incorporate a wider spectrum of abilities. It starts with websites, at least for the purposes of this conversation, but it includes your content, your copy, and your assets. And when we talk about assets, we generally mean images, videos, audio files, etc. Any of your branding and marketing collateral that can also include just even your brand colors and how you use those brand colors together. Having principles for making those things digitally accessible as well is super important. It includes documents. This could be Word documents, Google Sheets, Google Docs, all different kinds of files you may deliver electronically. It, of course, includes PDFs, which is very common on the web and a way of delivering content where you can control the look and feel, as well as the reading order and the headings. You can control all of that very effectively in PDFs. It doesn't stop there. It actually extends even further into emails and digital invitations, presentations, social media posts. I have a little graphic here on the screen that enumerates a lot of these different types, from images, video, design files, documents, PDFs, presentations, marketing collateral. There's a lot to this, and it's obviously more than just websites. So I want to take a moment to talk a bit more deeply about PDF accessibility. There's a lot to this. I know last time I was at an accessibility conference last year, they had a full 3-day track on just how to make PDFs accessible. So we're obviously not going to be able to explain all of it in one presentation, but a couple of nice, easy entry points to making your PDFs more accessible includes things like using heading styles in a logical reading order. There are tools to do this. Providing alternative text for images. It's called alt text. Many people probably have heard of this. If you don't know, though, the acronym ALT isn't really an acronym. It just stands for alternative text. And it's what a screen reader will read aloud if a person can't see the image but needs to hear it, or even if they can see the image but they want to hear about the image to get more content or context out of it. Also, PDFs have something called tagging. So you can tag a PDF, and this is how we create the structure. What I'd like to do is I want to pop out of our presentation for a moment, and I'm just going to give a little demonstration of what I mean by an inaccessible PDF or ways that a PDF could be made better. So I'm going to open up Adobe Acrobat, where I've already found a couple of PDFs on the web. I am a member of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, so I'm not picking on the museum. I just want to point out I went and found their mail-in membership form online, and if the PMA is listening, I will be happy to consult. You could call me. This is just some free tips on how to improve on this. So, first of all, this form, I think somebody tried really hard to make it very usable. It's got a lot of white space. It's looking good. It has clear headings, starting with mail-in membership form. It has headings for each of the sections. However, if I look at the tags in this document, and in Acrobat, there is a tags, a view tags function. I can view the tags, and unfortunately, this document has no tags. What that means is no information has been provided to a screen reader or to a keyboard on how to navigate through all of this content. This is going to represent itself in a couple of ways. If I want to see how does it feel is like on this document, I'm going to start, for instance, if I just put my cursor right into the address field, and I'm doing this because I already know there's some problems here, I'm going to just start with the contact information field. if I use my tab key, which would be the normal way or the typical way to get through this document with just a keyboard, I hit the tab key once and it takes me from address field directly down to the primary phone field. Skipped over city, state, zip code, email address. So, all right, well, that's unusual. I wonder if it's going to go back to those fields or not. I tab again, it takes me to the email address, which visually is above the phone number. Now, if I'm listening to this experience, let's say I'm using the screen reader to support my sighted experience, or I'm only listening to this, I don't think I would expect to hear the field address and then phone and then email, and then right after that, get the secondary phone, which is only labeled secondary. I don't know that it's the secondary phone number. Tab again, and now I get city. Clearly, all these fields are out of order. This is the computer and Acrobat trying its best to approximate what it thinks it's supposed to show. It's definitely looking at the code inside of this PDF, trying to figure out what's the next field. And these are how these fields appear in the code. We can't see that, but we could give a lot more guidance to Acrobat on which field should come next by adding tags and adding structure. So that's number one. There's another thing here too. When we go back to how does it look, I want to point out we have the brand colors for the Philadelphia Museum of Art green next to the black text. And this looks probably okay. But if I run a test, I have a tool here called Color Contrast Analyzer. And I can take an eyedropper and I can grab that green right out of the A. And I can look and see the contrast between the green in the A and the white background is only a 2.1 to 1 contrast ratio. In order to meet the guidelines in the web content accessibility guidelines, we need to be, for this size text, at least a 3 to 1, which we haven't hit. We're well below that. And for the smaller text over here in the top left of the document, it's the same green. I sampled it earlier. It's also 2.1. And this would have to be a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. So we're definitely off the mark on the color. A small color change could help. But for any of you out there that are building your brands and choosing the colors that you're going to use in your brand, it's really important to think about how these colors are going to play against each other. And how and when you're going to use them. There's another document that I found out here on the web. Interestingly, it is the overview for the role of the arts and culture in planning practice. So this is a PDF on really how to organize for arts and culture projects in the community. And I would say overall, the design of the document is pretty good. They have the opportunity to make this a very accessible document. As I scroll through, I can see on page 2, we already have a heading. We already have content broken up into paragraphs. And we don't have a very large amount of content under one heading, maybe a page at a time or less. So generally, I think they have good structure to support accessibility. But again, this document has no tags. So that's sort of demerit 1. Secondly, we get to this page 3, where we have what I think is meant to be a table. I mean, they even label it as table 1. However, I can tell even just by trying to select content on screen that it's going to read the column 1 of each row before it reads column 2. And none of these headings on this page are going to read as headings because we haven't told Acrobat or the document that these are headings. So anyone trying to listen to or follow this content with a screen reader or tab through this content is going to have a very difficult time. And it's almost guaranteed that they couldn't understand what this table is supposed to communicate. So again, this would be a pretty difficult table to make accessible. I would probably recommend finding a way to build this table in a proper table structure with columns and rows, not crossing these headings. Like this, we have a sort of a subheading here of the first piece of content. And there's just no way that I could turn this in, the way it's designed, to turn this into an accessible table header. So some redesign would be required for this page. But I think you can see that although visually this is, I think users could read this and understand it, in a linear listening experience, this isn't going to make any sense. I'll also point out from a color contrast perspective, going back here to page 1, we have this nice subheading, and it's called the Arts and Culture Briefing Papers 01. And in that, if I run a color contrast check on this, which we can do in real time, I can grab one of these, this eyedropper, and I'm going to sample the orange color, and I've got a 2.3 to 1 contrast ratio. So although I've gotten pretty good at recognizing right away colors that are going to have contrast problems, you really can never rely on your own eyes if you're sighted and designing to pick colors that are going to work. You always have to test them. And this is a good example of oranges are really hard to get enough contrast between orange and white at almost any darkness. You'd have to go pretty dark on the orange to get almost brown before you had enough contrast to make this work. I will kind of tout ourselves a little bit here. If I go back to my presentation, we have a slide here where we do have an orange, even though that can be very, very difficult. It took us a long time to pick this orange. But if I sample that orange, I'm right at 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. So for those who can see this presentation on screen, you can see this is how orange or how dark orange you have to get in order to meet the minimum requirements for the AA standard in the content accessibility guidelines. So with those 2 examples, I'm going to put them behind us. I'm going to continue with the presentation in the slides. Let me go back here to a presentation mode. So when we talk about, PDFs are one thing, moving on to the concept of document accessibility, it's really not any different. We're not going to have all the same tools or features in applications to make them fully accessible for all pieces of content. So because of that, I generally recommend some more restrictive design principles or some content development principles for documents. So first thing in Word docs and Excel documents and things like that, I generally recommend using the default background and default font colors. They're generally going to be black and white or some dark gray and white. There'll almost always be enough contrast ratio there. Another thing is in programs like Word and Google Docs, you have the option to use built-in styles. And this is really important because you have both a normal text style in Word, and you have a heading level 1 style and a heading level 2 style and a heading level 3 style. If you use those styles, and you can change how they look, but if you essentially tag or identify your headings using that style, not just using the font design controls, but if you actually use the style, when you export your document, or even just send a Word document to someone directly to read or consume, a listener will be able to listen for all those headings. They'll be able to skip to the headings that they want to engage with. And it makes that document essentially tagged, like we were talking about for a PDF. It's sort of the Word and Google version of tagging, even though they don't have tagging as formally as Acrobat does. I also always recommend you use the automatic formatting for lists. Don't make your own bullets out of special characters. Just use the built-in numbered list or bulleted list features of any program, because that'll also tell a listener that they're about to hear a list of items, and they'll be able to skip and pause on each item individually, and it'll help differentiate the start and end of each list item. Again, if you put images in your documents, for non-decorative images, always provide alternative text. And most programs, Google's not as good about this, although they do have some new features, but Word has an excellent accessibility checker. And if you use that, that'll get you about 90% of the way to digitally accessible. There's a few things you still have to do. You can't rely on it to know that you have contrast problems with your fonts and colors. And it won't know if your alt text is well written or if you just put the word alt text in the alt text field. But it can tee up for you most of what you need to do to make an accessible document. So just using the checker and following its instructions is actually a great place to start when you're in a document. One thing I would caution you against, a lot of people like to use embedded tables in Word documents. It's possible, but it's really hard to make an accessible table inside of a Word document. And unless you want to go to the trouble of learning how to do that in an accessible way, I would just recommend leaving tables for spreadsheets and finding other ways to represent that content. And then finally, email and meeting invitations are not immune to accessibility problems. So just like we had for document accessibility, using the default background, default fonts, avoid a lot of styled fonts in your emails and invitations. Again, allowing automatic formatting for lists, using your organization's standard email signature, if you know it's accessible, is always a good idea. And documents sent via email must also be digitally accessible. So if you don't know how to make your email accessible and you choose to include an inaccessible Word doc or PDF, that doesn't get you out of the hot water. So you still have to go do all the work in any of your documents that you attach. The last point I'll bring up is use caution when using emojis. This maybe isn't the most punchy example, but I have a little emoji on the screen here, which is two carp-shaped windsocks from Japan. And this emoji exists. It exists because emojis were invented by a Japanese gentleman. And the text behind this emoji is just the word flags. I don't think most people in the United States who don't have the context of what these flags represent in Japan are going to think that that's how it's going to be read out. But the main thing is that every emoji has text behind it. And a lot of people may not realize that or know it. Your listening consumers of your content will hear your emojis read aloud. They're going to hear that text. If that text has a very different meaning from the meaning you intended by including that emoji, you may want to avoid that emoji. It's always good to understand what the text is behind your emojis before you use them. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Jeff Wiesner. Sloan, would you like to tee Jeff up?
Absolutely. Again, thank you, Mike. Really appreciate the in-depth knowledge you've gained over the last 20 years as a technical architect and consultant and co-founder here at Tamman. And as you can tell by hearing how passionate Mike is, he spent a good part of the last half decade focusing on digital accessibility. So we're transitioning now. I'd love to bring Jeff Wiesner up onto the stage, as it were. Jeff is the senior product owner at Tamman. He is focused on making digital accessibility as accessible and digestible to audiences of all kinds. So Jeff, really appreciate you joining us today. If you'd obviously start with describing yourself and where you are before jumping in. And I think we're gonna have more of a conversation. So
Sure.
Katie, if you're available, Mike, if you're available, to jump in and have a conversation with Jeff if things come up that he's talking about. We're really going to be focused on social media.
Sure. Thanks, Sloan. So as Sloan mentioned, I'm senior product owner at Tamman. I've been with the company for 6 years. I'm a white man in my late 40s. I use pronouns he, him. I'm wearing a light blue button-down shirt. I have short brown hair. And I'm in my home studio with a large painting and a couch behind me. So I want to start off with a quick story. My wife, who works in an administrative role at her school, was recently also added on the responsibility of being social media manager. So she's been making posts on Instagram and LinkedIn, and she had one post in particular that she wanted me to just be a second set of eyes to look at. And she asked me to read through it. It was about a deadline and instructions for applying for admission to their school. And so it's pretty important post. And I looked at the image associated with the post, and it had a lot of text on it. And it also had text in different colors. And so I said, well, I like I like the core of what you wrote in the post, but I have some concerns about the accessibility of this post. There's text in the image that you don't repeat in the post, including date, which is the deadline, and a URL, the website for applying for this admission. And I'm also concerned about the contrast of some of these letters in front of the image. And I also hope that you're going to leverage alt text for the image, or at least put a description in the post itself. So she knows I work in accessibility, but I don't think that she was expecting that level of feedback. And it kind of just drives home the main point that I want to make as my portion of today's presentation, which is that social media is often overlooked as an area that really needs the same level of accessibility and inclusive design as other materials that a company or an organization puts out, but also that it's often relegated as an add-on role or given to someone who's more junior in their career. And it's understandable, because generally social media, we see it as a casual or informal medium to express ideas, take quick photos. We all have really high quality, for most of us, we have high quality cameras on our phones, so we can take great pictures, and we have a general understanding of how social media platforms work. And so what happens is it ends up getting created by an individual who maybe doesn't have all of that awareness or understanding or training in making sure that their posts are accessible. So that's what we want to talk about today, is leveling up your social media posts, for your organization. So one of the things that we can do, as I mentioned, was making sure that you leverage your platform's alt text tools, if it has it. And if it doesn't have that tool, or if you're not sure how to use it, you can always put the alt text of the image in the post itself. Consider also repeating that text that's in the image or that's in the alt text in the post, just to make sure that everyone can access it. A lot of the things that Mike went over also apply for social media content. So everything that he said about contrast also applies. If there's any videos or links to videos, you want to make sure that that content has captions or has transcripts, things of that nature. Also, like Mike said, we want to make sure that the use of emojis is sparing and intentional, and that you are aware of how a screen reader might read out that emoji, because it might be saying something about that emoji that's different than what you intended as part of the post. Also be sparing with their use of hashtags. And for URLs, to maybe use a URL shortener, just to make it easy for someone to remember, or easier for a screen reader to read out. And with all written language, to make sure that we are person first in our approach, where as we talk about people, we identify them by attributes that they want to also be identified by, not necessarily identifying someone by a disability or some other attribute, to really kind of dig in a little bit more than what's first visible or first aware of, and represent them more as a person, or as they choose to be represented. If we could advance to the next slide.
Yeah, but before we leave this,
Okay.
Jeff, this is Mike Mangos.
Sure.
I did have a question for you. So you mentioned alt text in social media. And in my experience, I've actually started to see more and more people use this, which is great news, right? At the same time, I've also seen people sort of extending the post or the story into the alt text, where that content only lives in the alt text. And I was kind of curious what you thought about that. Should that be there or should it not? And sort of what's the right depth in which alt text should be created?
Sure. Well, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I've experienced that as well in a couple of different areas. One is that when my wife and I watch movies, we often have the captions turned on, partly so we can keep the volume lower so it doesn't wake up our kids. But also I tend to get so much more information out of the subtitles than I get just from listening or watching the movie or the show. I get things like, if there's a song playing, I get to find out who the artist is and the name of the song. I can follow along and read the lyrics. When there's a conversation, often a person is being identified. And so it helps me. I have a hard time keeping track of the names of all the characters in a show or a movie. So it helps me to keep track. Sometimes it even gives you a clue of something that's happening kind of off screen that you're about to find out, because it says, Joe making a noise in the background. It's like, oh, Joe's going to be in the scene. Okay. So that's kind of cool. But also, as you mentioned with social media posts, some of the people in my network, they put their alt text in the posts, and some of them get really creative with that alt text. And I get so much more out of looking at the photo and their description at the same time, because they call out details that I hadn't really picked up on, because we're all just scrolling really quickly. So I would say, from my perspective, I think it's a great thing. I think that it brings more awareness to these accessibility features, which we always say, good accessibility is needed or required for some, but beneficial for all. So I would say, I can't think of a reason not to do it. Anyone else have a different opinion or a similar opinion?
No, I think that's great. I often find that sometimes I will do, this is Katie, I will do maybe a more brief alt text in my post, and then a more robust image description down below that maybe has a little bit more humor, a bit more detail. But yeah, exactly. I find that that's a little bit fun. I had a question springing off of Mike's question. In regards to, I really liked how you talked about the use of the URL shortener. And I've often found that it's commonplace to see the link emoji icon and say like link in the bio. And I wondered if you could talk about the level of accessibility for people who put links in bios, and whether that is best practice for accessibility, and how easy it is for a person with a screen reader to navigate into a bio to pick up a link.
Well, sure, thanks. That's a great question. And I'll say, just from my own perspective, as someone who doesn't have any disabilities, it's hard for me to figure out where I have to go next, because I go on the social media platforms, but I don't do a ton with it. I kind of jump in and I jump back out, and I go on with my day. So when people post about something that's really interesting to me and it says link in my bio, so I say like, okay, well, what does that mean? And how do I get to it? And so I'm kind of fumbling around for a little bit, and then it launches a browser window, and it's this, some of them have a lot of links on, there's a site I think called Linktree that will have just, there could be 10, 15, I've seen a lot of links. So now I have to figure out, is it the one at the top? Is it somewhere far down below? And I usually, or sometimes, lose my determination to figure this out, and I just abandon it. So I can only imagine that it's going to be that much harder for anyone who's using keyboard navigation or a screen reader, or who has any sort of cognitive disability, that they're going to have even more of a challenge than I do to get to that content. So that's why, I think it's best just to put everything, make it all kind of self-included in that post. Maybe, I don't know actually why people do that. Is it because some of the platforms don't allow you to put links in there, or do they want to send you to their other links? I'm not really sure what the reason behind that.
Can I speak? Hi, this is Julian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a really great question, Katie, because I think that, like, let's say like a place like Instagram, like the links don't, like if you go into, like, you want to be able to like click directly from that space and like go into another place, but you can't, like the way that like Instagram's like writing comments. And so
Right.
like, and so what, at least what I've been doing is like both placing like the direct URL, and then also giving people the option to like go directly to a link that they can click on. But yeah, no, I think that's really fascinating, because like, like Twitter, it's pretty integrated. Like the link is there, you can click on it, and it kind of like directly, or even Facebook. But for some reason, I feel like Instagram is kind of weird that way, but I don't know if that's other people's experience, but that's
my understanding is that maybe they feel like they want to keep people inside of their platform. And so they don't want to make it easy to bounce you out to other sites. But I feel like that's an issue where the business needs or wants get in the way of their constituents, their customers, what they actually need. So I think the suggestion that you had is I would wholeheartedly agree with, is have it in both places. So if you can put it in the body of that post so that everything is self-contained there, and maybe it's not as convenient as if you could just click on it, but it's certainly more convenient than having to navigate through a number of links and finding out, the destination that you're trying to aim for. Cool. Anything else on the topic before we move on? Okay, great. Thanks for those questions. They were helpful. So on this next slide, it says the importance of color contrast. And we have a few examples of photos with text overlaid. And the first one we see is a photo of an ocean wave with a bright blue sky in the background with some clouds. And it looks like a really nice day. And it has some text over top of it in white that I have a hard time reading. And that's labeled as a don't. But in the next image, which is labeled as a do, we have that image in the background now has kind of like a gray transparent overlay, which darkens it and allows that white text over top of it to be read a little bit more clearly, although the small text is still pretty small for me to read. So it does check off that box as far as being more legible and meeting contrast requirements. Perhaps I didn't run an eyedropper tool on this to see for sure, but it looks certainly more legible than the other example. But I don't know if now it ends up being the best representation of what was trying to be conveyed. So it's possibly an example of when accessibility is an afterthought that everyone potentially suffers, versus if it's thought about from the beginning of, well, let's choose a picture or a layout that accommodates both. It shows a photo in the way that we want it to be displayed, but we can also have the text be legible, maybe have them side by side instead of over top of each other. And that's what we end up doing a lot as we consult and guide designers in their website designs. Is it can be really challenging to have text over top of images. It's usually better just to have them separate, or to have it like on top of an opaque box, which leads us to the next example, which is an aerial shot of a road that looks like it's going through either a forest or a field, and some text overlaid on top of it that says on the road. And the first example, which is the don't, has the text being more transparent where you can see the image behind it, but it really impedes the legibility of the text. And so in the next example of that same image, this is the do, it no longer has the text as transparent, it's opaque. So it's a little bit more legible, but there is some smaller text on the, which looks like more like a script. And that's pretty challenging to read as well. So, it's color, it's font choice, it's size, and then it's also, is this the best layout for the material that you're trying to present? On the right-hand side of this screen, we have 9 different examples of color combinations of text over color swatches. So we have a range of colors: green, blue, purple, brown, and text that's like white and purple and brown and green. So we have a number of different examples, but what we're trying to explain here is that we really need to explore all of these different combinations of text over top of color. As Mike was showing, some colors are more challenging than others, such as orange is a pretty tricky one to solve for. So just to be aware of that and use contrast tools to check, because not all of us are really great at spotting it just at first glance. On the next slide, if we could advance. This is a list of accessibility tools and checkers. So the first grouping, we have 2 examples of automated accessibility scans. Then we have 3 examples of websites that help you with color contrast. And one that Mike had mentioned in our conversation earlier is a Twitter alt text reminder, which apparently you can have it linked to your account and it will alert you if you forget to include alt text in your image. So I think that's a pretty cool utility. And there's just so many tools available to us in a variety of different ways to make sure that what we're producing is accessible. So there are websites that you can go to that you can use an eyedropper tool like Mike demonstrated. You can also, for some of them, upload assets and it will run an analysis of them. You can submit a web address to some tools and it will scan your whole web page or your whole website. there are also plugins depending on what tools you're using for creating your designs, such as Sketch or Photoshop. There are plugins that you can use kind of in your design process to check your work as you go and call out any concerns or violations of the WCAG or things of that nature. So there's a lot available to us, and I just encourage us all to be vigilant and to be aware of what we need to do and figuring out the ways that we can achieve it.
Jeff, before we let you go, can we chat a little bit about Tamman house rules?
Sure. Any particular question, or you want me to explain what that is?
Just what house rules are and how organizations could potentially use a similar practice.
Oh, sure. So this came up quite a while ago as our team collectively was kind of getting acclimated to accessibility and inclusive design. Is a lot of questions come up, and they still come up as we work through our projects, and especially as we receive designs. And it's a way for us to, once we have discussions about, is a thing accessible, and we run certain tests on it, we run screen reader tests on it, we run automated tests, we do manual testing, visual testing, things of that nature, is coming up with a conclusion of, okay, we encountered this scenario, we encountered this problem or challenge, and we worked through it, and we came up with a solution. Now, how do we make sure that the next time we encounter this, or we encounter something similar, that we can leverage that work that we already did? And so we started documenting it in what we call our Tamman House rules, and we refer back to it, we add to it, we modify it, and that's kind of our body of knowledge that we continue to grow and evolve throughout the life cycle of our organization.
Absolutely, and I think the technique has been incredibly helpful. As you were talking through these tools and checkers, right? These are automated systems. We still want to take as much of a human-centered approach as possible, and understanding our approach to accessibility and how people digest that information.
Yeah, can I add to the conversation a little bit? This is Mike Mangos again. Yeah, Jeff, thank you for talking about the tools and the checkers. One of the things that I always try to impress upon folks, and I'm curious if this is your experience too, but is that human testing and human checking is not fully replaceable by technology. Just want to, I didn't talk about that in my part, but I think this is the right time to bring that up, right?
I think that's a great point. I think that, tools and automation can get you so far, but it can't exist on its own. And certainly, I think we're all well aware there are tools out there that are more overlays, that are kind of afterthoughts of, you have this existing website, it maybe wasn't designed or built with accessibility in mind, but now you need to solve for that. So here's an overlay that supposedly is going to solve all your problems. And we all know that isn't really how it works. And we also can't rely on these automated tools even throughout our process. We also need real users testing and reviewing our sites, people using assistive devices, people with disabilities, just to make it a more robust solution, for sure.
Yeah, I'll say too, I mean, I do a lot of consulting with big enterprises on their brands and their marketing. And, I've encountered multiple big companies in the last 6 months that are using Lighthouse, which is another kind of automated checker. And, they use that to make sure that their site is accessible. And they think, well, I got 100% on accessible on Lighthouse. And that just means you got 100% of the things that are automatable. It doesn't mean that you got all the things. It just means that what Lighthouse is capable of checking, you passed, which is, it grows all the time, but it's like no more than 40 to 43% of the things you have to do to make an accessible web experience. And so you can't just say, Lighthouse, 100%, check, I'm done.
I think it's a good starting point, but it's certainly not the end point. It's not the goal.
Yeah,
it's a milestone along the way of your journey, for sure.
I actually would love, this is Katie, and I'd love to ask a follow-up to that, Mike, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because we get this question oftentimes at Artreach, is when to bring in the user experience in the testing process, and whether you at Tamman would advise to use to work with folks that are well versed in web accessibility, who understand the back end technology, who can approach it from that perspective of understanding the material rather than pulling community members or stakeholders or, Mike, like a museum membership, card carrying holder, right? That
Yes.
might test out that form, next iteration. And so, I'm wondering what your thoughts are at advising our audiences into that, whether it's maybe more beneficial to work directly with users with disabilities who are part of a firm or a platform that already does this work rather than just crowdsourcing, because you might get in the weeds a little bit, perhaps. I don't know.
Totally. Jeff, are you okay if I field this one?
Yeah, I have some thoughts as well, but you can take the first pass for sure.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's totally fine. I think we're going to say the same things. So, Marty's going to get into a little bit of this in his case study, but so I don't want to steal too much from his thunder, but at the same time, I do want to say that it's important to get accessibility in as early as possible, right? That starts with design, or even, I would say even before that, before you get to design, it depends on how big of the effort is. I work mostly with marketing and advertising, right? So we usually start those exercises with ideation. What's the thing we think we're going to attempt to communicate? And by making sure that the folks that are doing ideation are thinking about who they're communicating to, and they're not just people that are exactly like them in the room, but that it's a much more inclusive picture of folks, that's a good starting point. And bringing diverse opinions in there early makes, it matters. So when you talk about when to bring in outside people and or specialists, there is a movement called Shift Left. I don't know if you've heard that term before, Katie. But basically, in a typical project management process, you'd have design, then you have development, then you have testing, then you have release and roll out to production, right? And that could be for a marketing piece. It could be for content on a blog. It could be for a new application or tool. It could be a new membership form. Okay. Usually this is the road we go down, right? Somebody has to check, like somebody has to think about it and design it. Somebody has to build it. Somebody's going to test it, and somebody's going to launch it. Well, typically in the industry, we were dealing with accessibility at the end of the testing process. And so Shift Left is about moving it, up to, can the developers build an accessibility and not have to wait to testing to find out that it's all broken and doesn't work? And then can you shift even further left to get it to design, right? Where you're designing and your designers are trained and specialists are coming in and helping at that point, and or your designers are trained to do it right from the beginning. That unburdens the developers, it unburdens the designers, or the testers, and it unburdens the release managers who have to deal with the support tickets, right? And you go all the way as far left as you can, and you start with, well, what's our idea? And if you can start there, that's the right point. I'll stop there because I think that's going to steal too much from Marty's talk, but.
That's great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah. Jeff, did you want to add anything? Sorry.
No, yeah. I mean, I was going to mention Shift Left, but, I think that accessibility and inclusive design is a journey. So you start it where you can. So if you have something that's already been created, then, you work with how you can make it more accessible. And if you're already in the design phase, it's wherever you can start making those improvements. And then you pick it up again on your next cycle. So yeah, exactly what you were saying, Mike, for sure.
Good.
Thank you.
Perfect. So as we enter the last phase of our presentation today, again, I wanted to thank Mike, who jumped in early to kind of give us a lay of the land and an overview of basic accessibility and giving us some really intricate details on some of the tool sets we use. And then Jeff Wiesner, our senior product owner at Tamman, for diving into color contrast issues and social media. It's not always the first thing we think about when it comes to accessibility, but is probably the most often times we touch and engage with our users. And then I wanted to bring up Marty Malloy, president of Tamman, to kind of talk about the buy-in on the organization level and how we engage everyone at every step of the process in the both digital and physical world. So Marty, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Sloan. As Sloan said, my name is Marty Malloy. I'm the president of Tamman. Today, I am standing in my home office. I have short brown hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a blue shirt to help accentuate those blue eyes. And I'm also wearing a headset with a boom mic so that I can hear and better and also be heard. And plus, I tend to listen to Mike a lot and copy what he does. So I think that's has been a good ethos for me as I move forward in my career. So, for me, I am someone who is not a technologist. You've heard from the technologists so far. My background is more in nonprofit, having worked at places like Project Home and Youth Build Philadelphia and education. I've sat on boards, I've led organizations like Greater Philadelphia Cares, and worked with the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey for a long time. So I come from a world where I feel very comfortable speaking to the audience that would be watching this. This is an ethos that you see on the screen. It says, well-supported people support people well. And if you haven't figured it out yet, at Tamman, we're very human-centered. We think about people first. And this ethos really, permeates through everything that we do, partly because it comes from my trauma-informed education and practice previously, where there's a saying, hurt people, and well-supported people is just a positive spin on that. And I think that that's really important. So I want to focus on the people in your organizations. So on the screen here is talking about inclusivity and disability, reiterating and summarizing some of the things that we've already addressed today. There are a few statistics that you'll see. The first is that 1 in 4 American adults have a disability. That's a huge number. This comes from the CDC. The second statistics are that in an 8-year growth rate, the proportion of adult internet users, we are expecting 47% to come from people with a disability and only 9% without. And finally, that disabilities aren't just physical. They come in a variety of areas. Mike touched on this, but it's really important to think about this, that you may not see a disability. Disabilities can be situational, temporary, or permanent. They can also be episodic. There are a lot of times when you don't know when the person you are trying to communicate content to or engage in your programs is accessing that information. And it's really important that you have it accessible at that time. And that disabilities can be visible or invisible. So we really want to try to create content that is as universal as possible. And finally, that this affects all ages. There are use constraints that are impacting every age, but specifically as we have an aging population, folks who may not have had a visible or a disability that they were used to interacting with or have assistive technology for, they may be developing cognitive, motor, sensory, or other use constraints that just come from aging. So it really is everyone that your organizations may be touching. So as someone who comes more from a nonprofit and a community background, I really want to focus this on, discussing your priorities. And when I do trainings with boards and with other nonprofits in the past, there are 3 things that really come up. Now, first, let me just say, for my bona fides, if you are a board member of an organization watching this, your first duty is to raise money. It's a hard fact, and it's something that I just need to drive into every group that I talk to, that if you're a board member, if you make that commitment, it really is the first thing that you do. And web accessibility, inclusivity has an impact on that. So for my board members specifically, I think that's really, really important. And we do that through 3 main ways. Number 1, awareness. number 2, engagement, and number 3, retention. So when we talk about engagement, what I'm really talking about here is a return on mission. You're going to be putting time and energy, investment, money, whatever it might be, into an effort of being more inclusive. And as you saw from Mike's example, it can happen on the web, it can happen in documents, it can happen with your social media. So in doing that, you want to make sure that if I'm going to spend time on this, is it really impacting the mission of my organization? The answer is yes. And it will do that in many ways, not the least of which is growing your audience, growing your participation, growing your donor base. But as Mike and Jeff also talked about, that there are a lot of options to access information out there. And folks who may have a use constraint or a disability, if they run into issues with accessing your information, they're going to move on. And even if they've been a part of your program before, you want to retain your audience. You want to retain your team members, your employees, your volunteers, and your donors. You can go to the next slide, please. So there are aspects for across all of your major constituencies with the organizations that we're talking about here. We're talking about the general public. We're talking about customers that you may be engaging, participants, and they're most often going to be engaging with websites, the documents. You might have assistive technology as part of a program, and you need, making sure that they have access to that information is really, really important. Your team and your volunteers is the next constituency, though, that is very, very important. Oftentimes, your team or your volunteers, if you're a volunteer-driven organization, are the public face of your program, your organization. It could be a docent, it could be an intern, whatever level within the organization they are. When we're creating information, content that is accessible, your employees and your volunteers and others in your organization are going to be able to access that information more readily and more easily themselves and communicate it out to the general public. And it's very, very important. It's an area that I think doesn't get enough attention when we're talking about digital accessibility. I think there are many people who probably came on this cafe who were thinking, oh, I'm going to learn about my website. And you saw that we're really covering a much wider range of digital content than merely a website. So thinking about your volunteers and your employees is very, very important as well. And finally, your funders, your board members, the folks that are your major stakeholders in driving your mission forward, they also don't want to have any barriers to usability and accessibility in what they're doing moving forward. And retention, as I already mentioned, is very, very important. But one of the most exciting things about accessibility in this space, and I think particularly in the arts, who are doing some really innovative things, is the opportunity to innovate, using accessibility as just one more reason to get a stronger return on that mission. You can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through this case study, but this is what Tamman does. What we're doing today is a lot of who we are and at the core of what we do. And so we will work with businesses on a regular basis who are often just getting started when it comes to digital accessibility. How do I get started? As Mike mentioned at the very beginning, there are 80 primary requirements. There are hundreds of other requirements. There's so much to think about. And then when you factor that over all sorts of other content, it can feel very, very overwhelming. So I want to lower the temperature for anybody who's watching this and say, there are organizations like us and Outreach who are here to help make that a journey that is a lot easier to tackle. So what you see on the slide here is for kickstarting digital accessibility are two main slopes. On the left-hand side, you have a compliance approach. And on the right-hand side, you have an inclusive practice. These things intertwine. They go together because everyone that we work with starts in the place of compliance and reactive. And that's okay. In fact, that's great. But it needs to be said that it's important to not stop there and move towards an inclusive practice because otherwise it just won't be sustainable. We really want to make sure that whether you're starting with a risk or legal concern, that you're moving into a place where you've created systems and workflows that will allow you to be successful. So as the slide continues, you can see some of the reasons why you might want to start with compliance. We have meeting legal requirements. This is driving a lot of things in our society right now. It's not usually where we start. We have addressed some of the legal reasons why you might need to do this, but we really truly believe that it's the right thing to do. And there's good business reasons to do it for yourself as well. Leveraging external support, making a public commitment, not being left behind, being able to say, we believe in inclusivity. And I feel very confident that anyone watching this today would say, yeah, we care more about community building and being more inclusive than excluding anyone. Example activities in this compliance and reactive space would be checklists, audits, testing scripts, ways in which you can do quality assurance, and then remediating. Remediating a website that may have some things that can be improved, remediating documents that can be improved. As we move over into the inclusive practice space, we get very excited about training folks and building in-house champions. We want to make sure that we are standing up organizations that feel confident and excited to be more inclusive. And I think this audience is probably number one for folks who want to be excited about that. So having those in-house champions who learn some of the tricks of the trade, who learn how to use the dropper and the color contrast checker, who are thinking about when they're creating any content, be it a blog post, a new page on the website, whatever have you, a document, that they are excited to then walk through how that looks, how that sounds, and how that feels to their potential constituencies. And then some of the example activities that go into this are creating design systems, creating workflows that can make this a standard operating procedure as we shift left and start at the very beginning in ideation and all the way through, making sure that it's pretty simple. You can move to the next slide, please. So,
Sure.
Mike, yeah.
Hey, Marty. Yeah, sorry, I wanted to jump in, if I may. This is Mike Mangos again. I want to point out that last bullet is important, the multi-point QA, because I think this is a point at which people get confused as they're building out this practice. They think, well, wait, if testing and test scripts is part of compliance, what is this multi-point QA in inclusive practice, right? And I wanted to touch on that because I think it's a really important point. You don't have to wait till the very end to test your work. You can test it at design, you can test it at development, you can test it before release. And if you have accessibility tests built in all throughout, you've actually made your job a lot easier.
Without a doubt.
I just wanted to offer that because that's an important distinction.
Absolutely. It's really important. So let's move on because this is really important too. I started with board members. I started with funders because this does take time. It takes money and it takes leadership. And we don't want to shy away from those things. Now on the screen here, you'll see a version of the intertwined slopes of compliance and reactive and moving towards an inclusive practice and proactive. And then you'll see a baseline number. To any audience members that may be out there, please don't get hung up on years. These are actually just stand-in times, whether it be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It could be months. It could be multi-year journey. It depends on what an organization can do, and that's okay. But getting started is the key. Lastly, you'll see a gray slope in the middle that we've overlaid, and that's your return on investment or your return on mission. And that's really what we want to communicate. Once the investment in time and treasure has happened, making sure that that investment pays off over the long term is really the key. And as we were just discussing, making sure that those sustainable practices, those standard operating procedures get built in, as Mike was just even saying, the multi-point QA, and making sure that we're checking this as we go, you will find that when they're built into the regular process, you'll continue to have a high return on your mission without that, ongoing investment in time or money. And so we don't want to do, we want to be clear about that, because while there are automated tools and there are things that you can do out there on the web, there's lots of resources. It's not just about one thing or the other. It is a group effort. You can go to the next slide. So what would we advise you to do today? So on this slide, in terms of action steps, we have short-term actions and we have a future focus. In the short-term actions, we have testing. Again, at the end of production, if you're just getting started at that compliance piece, you may have things that are out in the world already. You may have things that you're actively using. That's okay. Let's test that. Let's do some other in the wild tests. We can remediate those things as issues are arising, and then we love the opportunity to come in and work with teams, work with boards, work with executives. Whatever group is the first group to start with, we've done it in a lot of different ways, D, E, and I, and A groups with corporations. We're happy to come in and work with different roles and different groups to make sure that accessibility is something that can be bought into and made as part of the regular practice of any organization. And in the future focus side of things, we have tooling, creating those efficiencies, executing on things consistently, building up the muscle memory to allow you to do this is very, very important. Having the governance so that it doesn't slide backwards, that you're continuing to move forward and doing things with the highest possible quality, and that when gaps occur, and if gaps occur, that they can get filled. Partnerships is very interesting as the next bullet point, because once you as an organization make a commitment to digital accessibility and inclusivity, you want to make sure that your partners and vendors and other groups that you're working with share your commitment. And so working to make sure that those folks that you bring in and work within your organization in those capacities also are using accessible assets and things like that. And again, asking yourself all the time, am I getting the return on my mission? Is this time and energy and money and investment making a difference to proactively move us forward? We would argue every time, absolutely, because of those three things that I mentioned at the beginning: awareness, engagement, and retention. Significantly improving your user experience, whether they have a use constraint or not due to a disability. Necessary for some, useful for all. When you organize your information thoughtfully, that's going to benefit everyone. And usability and accessibility go hand in glove. You'll be managing your reputational risk. This is crucially important. Accessibility, while still, I think for a lot of folks at the newer stage of things, it's moving quickly. And you don't want to get left behind from a reputational standpoint. And I couldn't say it enough times. There are options out there, and more individuals who have use constraints due to an invisible or visible disability, they have options and they have choices. Whether they're a donor, whether they're a volunteer, whether they're a participant in your programs, they will move on if anything is inaccessible to them. And so making sure that you can retain and grow your base is really, really important. So if you're very interested in getting started now, and I would love to bring Katie back onto the stage with me on the next slide here, is how to get started. You're doing it, and this is the most exciting thing. You're doing it now. You're watching this, you're engaging in it. Take the next step and talk to your colleagues. The fact that Artreach is doing this and pulling this together and engaging this larger community to do this just should be applauded, because this really is where it begins. It starts with learning and discussion. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Katie.
Yeah, I think people don't really know where to start, right? And they know that there's things that need to be done. They're scrambling up, maybe an intern, a social media manager, and it's like, where can we get started? Where's the low-hanging fruit, right? And then not necessarily thinking that this is a journey, as you said. And I think it's really helpful to see that some of this can really develop over a period of time. You don't just
Absolutely
have to dive in. Yeah.
Yes. And I would start with, taking an asset inventory, thinking about the things that you have right now that are really important to you. It could be your website, or it could be that membership form. What are the things that are most important? And then reaching back out to groups like Artreach to help get them connected to places that can give them some guidance on that if they need it, or doing their own research. A lot of this information is out there. We just happen to be a wonderful guide who can help shortcut some of that and work with folks. So folks can schedule an introduction with us. But taking a sense of what are the things that are most important to them. And the last piece down here, we have 6 things on this slide: curiosity leading to discussion, asset inventory leading to engagement, scheduling an introduction and getting leadership buy-in, because leadership matters a lot, accessibility assessment, giving you a baseline of where you are right now. Some folks may be further along than they really think, scheduling a training to empower their champions within. But it's that last point that you just mentioned. You don't have to do everything at once. Let's build a planned roadmap, an accessibility maturity roadmap to help get you there over whatever time makes sense for you, because we know that we live in a world of scarce resources. And if your main resource is time and you don't have a lot of it because you're doing so much great work and service in the community, hey, we'll work with you over a long period of time to take this a little bite at a time.
Yeah, there was a great example that I'd love to share with everyone is almost sort of a final takeaway. And it was during the pandemic, an arts organization reached out to us and they said, we have 80 active docents who are in lockdown, who still want to volunteer and they still want to help. And my question to them was, how is your alternative text on your images on your website, right? Like, how many docents didn't you have? Can you dive up, like divvy up your start a project, dig in, and really start to think about how you can activate volunteers, perhaps in the off season when you're not outside in the garden, or you don't have regularly scheduled school tour visits at your museum. Things like that you can really think about building community around accessibility and inclusion work. So it's not also just a burden on the staff. And I say burden as in like work burden.
Sure, yeah.
Right. But that you get that stakeholder buy-in, you also get that volunteer buy-in, and perhaps some of those volunteers are also board members as well. So really thinking about that, some of this work doesn't have to be just relegated to your IT department, your web design department too.
It can really come from any champion. And we've seen those in-house champions come from, a marketing department, or coming from DEI&A groups in the HR space. We've seen it come from legal or compliance. There might be someone who says, oh, we got to do this because, and I will say though, one area where it is crucially important to get buy-in, and where we've seen it make a big difference one way or the other, is when leadership buys in. When the board members and the executive leadership say, yeah, this is important to us, that really does tend to drive other things, which is understandable. But the champions can truly come from any part of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Katie. We really are so appreciative. I'd love to bring back, just to say goodbye, my co-presenters, Sloan, Jeff, and Mike. And we just, this has been a lot of fun.
It has. It's been really great. I really want to thank Sloan, Mike, Jeff, Marty. Thank you so much, really, for your thoughtful and helpful content. And most importantly, I think your commitment and your passion to this work. I mean, it really comes through in how you present the materials. And I just love the fact that, our slogan is art is a human right, and yours is that information is a human right. I'm like, oh, we're a match made in heaven. It's really wonderful. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really understand that many people in our audience have options to spend their time and to spend their learning engagement, and we really appreciate that commitment to building knowledge around accessibility. I just want to invite everyone to please reach out. We're going to maybe post a landing slide as our sort of sign off for all of you for your contact information. But please feel free to reach out to Tamman if you have questions about this presentation. And also reach out to Artreach if you have topics and questions that you'd like to see generated here. You can email us at info@art-reach.org. We also invite you to subscribe to our channel, our Artreach channel on YouTube, our Instagram and TikTok. Yes, we are on TikTok now, Artreach Philly for more content. You can also check out our merch at our Threadless shop. We've got Art is a Human Right t-shirts and sweatshirts, so you can check that out as well. But I know Tamman's got a great podcast if you guys want to plug that before you sign off. But
oh, you don't have to ask me twice. Yes. So our podcast is called Article 19. You can get it anywhere you get your podcasts or on our website, which is tammaninc.com, TAMMANINC.com. But check out Article 19, which derives its name from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it is the one that talks about access to information being a human right. So that's why we named it. We really cover a broad spectrum, kind of like today on the ADA, education, language, whatever floats our boat. But we'd love to have you listen and check out Article 19.
Great. Sloan, you want to put up that landing page and we'll just do a sign off and thank everybody for their support, and enjoy the rest of your day, night, weekend, whenever you may be watching.
Absolutely, yeah. Mike, if you would put up the slides, appreciate it. Just again, wanted to thank, Artreach, Katie, entire organization has been great to work with. Hetty and Brian have really kept up with us, so we're really appreciative of the ASL interpreters as well. Thank you so much. Again, enjoy your day, evening, whenever you're watching this. We really appreciate the time and really appreciate you sticking with us.
Thanks all.